Welcome to Crime and Wine. I'm Pamela Fagan Hutchins, your host, and this is the show where I talk with other crime fiction writers about the stories of thrills and suspense that will leave you mystified, sometimes horrified, and always wanting more. Please join me in welcoming today's special guest. Folks, did you ever have one of those days? Well, today has been that for me. I have the best interview coming up for you, but I accidentally didn't record the first 1 minute. So here I am to do a special introduction for my guests today for Crime and Wine. The first is Ken Oder. He is the award-winning author of the Whippoorwill Hollow novels. And the second guest we have today is Ian. Ian is a high school student, and he was job shadowing me today, which we all can just imagine the excitement of job shadowing an author. First of all, where do authors work? Their homes. This poor young man suffered through a half a day with me up here at Snowsville, and the result is this wonderful conversation with Ken Oder, Ian, and me that I think you will absolutely love. Let's jump right in. If you were taking yourself back to 10th grade and you were picturing that young, bright-eyed boy that you were, and you wanted to coach him about being a writer someday, what piece of advice would you dispense? Talk about throwing you to the wolves here and putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I think there are probably two key things you need to do if you want to be a writer. And one of them is you need to read good writing. You need to read the classics. You need to read all you can get your hands on, read all the time. Mm-hmm. And you need to read some things that you think are bad writing too. After you get into them, if you think they're bad writing, keep reading them and keep figuring out why you think they're bad. And then you need to write every day. You don't have to write a whole lot, but you need to write regularly. And I started a journal back when I was I think it was about the 7th grade. And I kept doing that. And it helped me, writing is much harder than people think it is. People think, we'll just sit down and we'll just spin it out. Well, you start trying to do that a little bit and see how it goes. And, writing is a matter of practice and a matter of learning the craft. Mm-hmm. And the sooner you start and the more you do it, the better you'll be.
Ian's already been doing some practicing, I will say. Mm-hmm. Are you a big reader too?
I do read quite a bit, not as much during like the school year itself, because I'm, like I said, busy. And then also I'm forced to read anyway during like school enough, I feel like. But then during the summer, I do usually read a lot.
He has been sharing with me that what he writes is, at this point, he's pretty multi-genre. And he's started moving into short stories that are getting a little longer and a little longer each time. So he's starting to grow that. Do you ever journal?
I journal occasionally, more for I occasionally for more like what frustrated me today, what was good today, what was whatever. And then I don't know, I'm not very good about doing that consistently because usually I just forget, and then I don't I'll get to it and I don't really know what to put down all the time.
Yeah.
And maybe putting down just ideas that I have for writing in it while I'm doing that would be a good idea to start doing that.
That sounds like a good approach. The good thing about a journal too is nobody ever has to see it. So you can pretty much write whatever you want, write bad stuff too. I mean, you could do whatever you want with it. I actually didn't start reading until I was 11 years old. I hated reading books and stuff. Mm-hmm. And my uncle and aunt sent me a birthday present, and it was the book Treasure Island. And I started reading that, and boy, that really set me off, and I kept going from there. And I think, around the 10th grade is when I discovered Hemingway. And Old Man and the Sea, and let's see, For Whom the Bell Tolls. I read those are great novels, and they inspired me a lot and got me thinking maybe I wanted to be a writer too.
Right.
Have you read any Hemingway?
Yeah, I have actually. I've read A Farewell to Arms because for our book critiques that we do for history, and that was for our World War II. No, World War One. Yeah, wasn't it set in World War One?
It was World War One.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
I was
he was
like,
in Spain.
Yeah, that's
Or
right.
was it? Oh man, Ken,
I
do
think
you
it
know?
was World War
The
One.
Spanish
It
Revolution.
was the Spanish Revolution,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, because all of a sudden I was having that wait. He was in Spain, and it was like, wait.
Was that the Farewell to Arms?
It was because that was where, or was that For Whom the
I
Bell
think he was in
Tolls?
Italy
Dang.
during the Farewell to Arms because he was an ambulance driver, from what I remember.
Or was that?
Yeah, that was Robert Jordan. That actually, I said For Whom the Bell Tolls. I really meant A Farewell to Arms. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I'm getting old, I got
Yes.
a lot of lapses here. You got to be careful.
Which I believe wasn't it A Farewell to Arms that he wrote mostly in Wyoming, because he used to
He
summer
did write
here.
some of that,
He, in fact, where we're sitting on the face of the Bighorns,
Mhm.
he used to, at the beginning of the summer, go up the Red Grade Road, which is behind us. And if you're familiar with the Bighorns in Wyoming, it's a really gnarly road. And then he would spend time up here in the mountains, fly fishing. Sparrow Wigwam was one of his hangouts. And that's to this day, rejuvenated lodge and vacation spot. Anyway, and A Farewell to Arms was the book he was working on the summer or 2 summers that he was Wyomingite.
I'm pretty sure he completed it in the Sheraton Hotel, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, one of the rooms there.
Yeah, so we have our claim to Hemingway here. I went to Key West this last year, and I went to the house that he lived in on Key West, and saw the famous 6-toed cats and stuff. So I'm getting I'm branching out and getting more and more of my Hemingway.
There's a Facebook group about Hemingway, a Facebook page for Hemingway, and they send out stuff every couple of days about Hemingway. And there's a lot of this stuff about the Key West area.
Yeah.
What did you think of his style?
It was very like, I don't know. He had a really good way of describing the war, because it was very miserable. Like the best way I can put it.
Yeah.
And the war just sucked all around. And it's very like, I don't want to say like I said, is dull, like in a way, to kind of explain that it was like very dreary, very,
right.
He didn't, it kind of like was dull. And then it kind of contrasted with like the, his relationship with the nurse in that book. I can't remember her name right now, but because those parts are very different, and like you can show how he kind of like changed like between the like actual war and then that between there. And then also another thing I really picked up on that I talked about a lot in my paper is how much they drink like throughout the entire book.
Yes.
Because they just want to like escape the war. They're all like, everyone in that book is an alcoholic, like majorly.
Yeah. Actually, a lot of what you read about Hemingway, both his fiction and his life, there's a lot of drinking in there. I mean, he was drinking pretty heavy.
Yeah, he drinks a lot.
They did a Hemingway anniversary festival this last year for a lot of his books, and Wyoming participated because of our small claim to him. And one of the Sheridan College historians was telling me he didn't drink himself to death. He drank because, and that he had some medical conditions and depression and lingering pain from injuries from, his wartime experience.
Yeah, he did have a lot of injuries
that made him self-medicate. So,
I was a lawyer before I retired, and I represented in a case the first literary agent in Hollywood, a guy named Harold Swanson, who everybody calls Swanee. And he represented, I didn't know this when I went in to meet with him about the case. And I found out as I was sitting there that he represented most of the major literary figures in that period in and he was negotiating with movie studios, taking their novels and negotiating the rights of the novel so that they could make them into a movie. And he represented Hemingway in a few instances, and he represented everybody. He represented Faulkner and Fitzgerald, and so he wrote after I represented him. He wrote a novel, not a novel, a memoir, and I read the memoir, and in there he talks about how Hemingway didn't have any friends.
Yeah.
Literary guys. I guess Fitzgerald and he were big pen pals, but they weren't great friends. And Fitzgerald was an alcoholic as well. And so they had a lot of trouble. But the funniest stories were about Faulkner. He talked about Faulkner being, he would drink, he was a binge drinker, and he would start drinking, and he had a guy he hired that would take him to a hotel where he would just try to stay away from everybody while he drank, because he would get really obnoxious, and he would start taking his clothes off. He got into the drinking until he was just flat out buck naked, and blottoed, and then he would get past it, and he would go, he would come back to life. And
I want to be very clear that we are not advising Ian that in order to become a writer, that he needs to get blotto and take his clothes off. That is actually a negative. That's a bad thing. But they do make for these larger than life epic stories about some of these people that, are just names on a title page to us anymore. But to Swanee, they were real humans that were his clients.
Yeah.
That's what really sticks out to me there, is that they're real humans that, poor Ian's been kidnapped. It's like, how do you shadow a writer? Well, the writer works from home. You're coming up the mountain with me. We're going to talk writing up the mountain. And, and that writers are just normal people with real lives, but our readers think, and hello readers, our readers start to think of us as something different. I don't want to say more, but different, because to us, we are the sum of our stories, or the sum of what they've heard about us. And so it's interesting when you hear about those writers and you discover more of the real human behind them, because they didn't have Facebook. They weren't dramatically overexposed like I am, right, Ken?
Yeah, or me either. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, goodness. So Ken writes mystery thriller, suspense, romance, narrative nonfiction, multi-genre, but kind of bleeds over into some of what I do. And I really, really love his Whippoorwill hollow novels. And so for you guys out there that are watching the show, start with the closing, but, run the table. But he's also written a romance. It was The Princess of, help me.
Yeah,
Sugar Valley?
The Princess of Sugar Valley.
Yes. And then your absolutely amazing book of essays and your nonfiction take, or Ken's nonfiction look at the world. Tell us about the name of that and how it came to be.
Yeah, that's, we published the first 50 blogs that I wrote. You and Bobby Mars talked me into writing a blog back. This must be 7 or 8 years ago now.
We needed to bridge him. He would go through these periods of not writing, and we wanted him to keep writing all the time. And so we said, he's like, but I don't have any story ideas. I said, okay, well, just write about your life, write about all these wonderful stories you regale us with at writers' retreats, right? And so he started doing it, and they're magic. They're just magic. They're so good.
Well, the first one I wrote was actually about that literary agent.
Yeah.
And handling that case and the things he told me and the relationship I developed with him and how much I enjoyed him. And so that was kind of the beginning of it. But that book I've published those, and it's a free book online. And I think we sell it for $6.50 or something like that in paperback. And it's called Keeping the Promise.
Keeping the Promise. That's right.
Yeah. And
you did. You kept your promise.
Yeah. I'm still writing those monthly blogs. I've probably written 20 or 25 more since we published that.
So there'll be a volume 2. There'll be a volume 2.
Volume 2 later on. Yeah.
And I'm not going to ask Ken how his current novel is going because that would be putting him on the spot. He takes breaks between each one. Life gets in the way. Like you're expecting some grandbabies right now, right?
Yeah, it's been, I've got the horses driving me out to the barn every day, and I've got the twins coming.
Behind him of his horses.
Grandchildren already, so it's not like I've got nothing to do.
Well,
but I am trying to work on it. I've got, I don't know whether this doesn't happen to you, I don't think. Pamela is the most disciplined, prolific writer of our times, at least prolific writer of high quality of our times.
You exaggerate, but thank you.
Don't have much quality, but maintains high quality and manages to somehow churn out 3 to 5 books a year, while I'm sitting over here trying to get 1 book every 3 to 5 years.
Contractual obligation right now has me scrambling. Stop saying yes, Pamela. So yeah, and there is no pressure. We wait for Ken to come up with something fabulous and then we celebrate. So it's no big deal. Ken is better at saying no than I am. Now, Ian, do you have any questions that were in what you were suggested to ask today that you want to ask Ken and I while you've got 2 writers in the room? Not any pressure there on Ian either.
Well, I kind of I kind of heard it from you, but I guess I haven't really asked Pamela about it. I mean, you can both put in. It's about like, when did you kind of get like interested, and like how did you get interested into writing specifically, and like see as like what, like this is going to be my career field. I want to do this.
I never thought it would be my career. I knew that I could not help but write. Even if it was, I used to do, as a lawyer, Ken was also an employment lawyer. I was an employment lawyer that got out of practicing law, and I did investigations. I was a card-carrying private investigator for a very short period of time, in addition to being a lawyer investigator. And so I would do investigations into misconduct if people got in trouble at work. And I would churn out these 60, 80-page reports. I mean, fingers flying. I'd interview all these witnesses. Who pinched whose butt? And did you really send her, that picture on your phone? How dumb are you? Those kinds of cases, like Ken's cases, but mine were earlier on in the process. And it was never a chore to me. And so I was behind the scenes, I was writing, but I was never finishing. And then I met this guy whose hair was a little bit too long. He liked to surf and play the bass, a chemical engineer. His name's Eric. Ken's laughing because he's friends with Eric. And he said, if you marry me, what do you want to be when you grow up? Mind you, I was 38, 39 years old at this point, and I was general counsel for a refining company that was, one of the biggest refineries in the world. And I said, I think I've kind of done some things. And he said, no, what dreams have you not fulfilled? And it was that question that made me say, I want to finish a novel. Well, 2 years later, he's like, where the beep is your novel? And so we went on a trip to India, and I wrote a novella as fast as I could, 20,000 words. And it was basically a spoof of our life. He said, this is great. Keep going. And I did. Pretty soon I had 1 novel, and then 2, and then 3. And at that point, he said, send them to agents. And agents said, send us your books. And I sent them into contests, and they said, you won. And all this stuff started happening. And my first book came out, and it made money. And he's like, I told you, this is going to be great. And then it was like this, right? Let's see if I can get this on camera. So you start out to think, man, this is awesome. I am a writer, and you are. But I was like, I'm a writer who makes money. And then you're a writer who doesn't make money. And then you're a writer who makes money again. And then you're a writer who loses money. And then you're a writer who makes a lot of money. And it was just back and forth and back and forth. But I probably quit and became a full-time writer 7 years ago. And there are years where I do quite well, and there are years where I don't, but I never think I can stop writing or I don't want to write. I think, how can I keep making this work? Because it's all I can do anymore, if that makes sense. It became the thing that I love to hate, because writing doesn't love you back, right, Ken?
No,
it does not love you back. You love to write.
During the process, it doesn't love you back. It pretty much hates you.
It hates you so
during the process. But when you finish something, when you've reached the level with a piece that is what you wanted to say, and it's good and it feels good.
Yeah.
There's nothing quite like that. There's nothing like that.
And you know that the part that I love too, Ken, is I love the experience you get when other people dive into your worlds and they begin to talk about them as if they're real. And they are real. You created them and they exist. They just aren't in the same dimension as the rest of us are living in. But when they're talking about your characters and they're talking about your places and what happened to them, and you realize you've made a connection, you've closed a loop, if you will. So it can be rewarding. It just hurts most of the time.
There's another phenomenon which we talked about at one of your writing conferences. You asked the question of those of us who were there, what's the thing you like most about the writing process?
Yeah.
Or since the process is mostly edit, kill yourself, edit.
Bleed.
But the thing that I like, which I didn't know at the time whether it was normal, was that I had several instances, many of them, where the characters I was writing about seemed to take on a life of their own. And they started talking to me.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not in the room and they're not, I'm not crazy. Believe me. They're not in the room really talking to me, but I could occasionally hear their voices.
Right.
I'd be writing and they would say something. It felt like they were saying it. It had to come out of me, but it felt like this person was there and saying it, whispering in my ear. And so those voices in my head, those were really exciting and fun. And I remember saying that in your conference and being a little nervous about it and kind of sitting there for a second. I think it was Jim Cole at the time.
Yeah.
He was there with us.
Yeah.
He said in a soft voice next to me, I thought I was the only one.
Yeah. It's one of the chief thrills. It's like you think when you try to impose your will on a story, oftentimes it doesn't go so well. It's one of the positives and negatives of, when you write crime fiction, it's very plot driven. You have to have some kind of outline or you're going to get totally lost in the weeds. But yet at the same time, you have to leave yourself the freedom for the voices to speak to you because they're going to. And if you try to force your way past and impose your will on those voices, you're going to end up in a lot of trouble. It's better to just stop and say, okay, why am I laughing? Why am I crying? What's coming? Open myself up to it. And this is going to become the kind of story that I tell. So I think I probably said something along that lines or something more brilliant back at the writer's retreat. So a lot of times what you find is that writers make no money. And so they have all these side hustles or they have their day job and writing is what you do in the middle of the night or, whatever. Right. And so you'll find writers that are editors. You'll find writers that are teachers, right? A whole lot of teachers are writers and vice versa. Just to use a local example, Craig Johnson used to teach at Sheridan College, and so anyway, you'll find writers that are cover artists that are all kinds of things that format books for people, but they try to figure out something they can do to have, their whole heart in the industry at the same time as they have to eat somehow. And until we land those television deals, we don't make a whole lot of money regularly. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else brilliant that I've ever said, Ken. That may have been the pinnacle moment for me.
She wrote a book early on about indie publishing. And there were things in there, advice she gave to people who were like me, who were at that time, I was just drafting novels and I was sending them out. I wasn't getting a whole lot of, I get something back, which was more than most people got, but I wouldn't get acceptances. So she had a bunch of points that she said we should all try to follow. And one of the most profound was you said, try not to suck.
I did say that.
Yeah, and
Have you been trying? You try not to suck. That's good.
I find myself trying not to suck a lot. I mean, you really that's a lot of what you do is try to be awesome, you know, you gotta
Well,
do better.
Anne Lamott called it shitty first drafts, or just crappy. Whatever it is, this becomes something that you show your high school class, and they're like, "You had more fun than me today." They're just like throwing around all the bad words. But yeah, you try not to suck, but you keep going anyway.
You also wrote a section about why you write, and you talked about some of what you said earlier, like you kind of why I write. I kind of have to write. I need to get it out, and I need to craft it and to make it better. And but it's also if you write something good, it's probably going to have a big piece of your soul in it.
Yeah.
And it's going to come out. And I remember, I'm paraphrasing now, but there was a toward the end of a section that you wrote about this, you said to the reader, take my heart, feel it in your hand, pass it around.
Yeah.
Kind of how you feel. You're very vulnerable when you lay out that novel.
Do you, Ian, when you write, do you feel that? Do you feel that like it's scary, like you're putting yourself out there?
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, maybe not the putting yourself out there, because I don't really like publishing anything. It's just mostly myself, but like maybe like letting other people see it. I'm kind of anxious about it because, I might think it's okay, but then like, what are they going to think? Or I think it sucks. And then are they going to think it sucks? Yeah. And it's like,
are they going to see that I disclosed something I really cared about? Are they going to see that I don't like my neighbor or my friend?
Right. Are they going to like catch all the nuances and like all sorts of things like that?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a little bit. I'm not really like publishing anything, so it's a little.
You can hide it still a little bit.
Right.
When I was first getting closer to publishing and I was working with an editor, I sent her a scene I was so proud of. I thought I was so raw in this scene emotionally. She sent it back and she said, not quite. She said, no, go deeper, show more. And I'm like, I was angry. It was like, I poured my heart out. I gave you my heart and let you pass it around, in this scene. And she said, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. Do it again. And you're like, okay, so obviously in trying not to suck, I still suck, but let me try it again. And I finally got to the point where I felt like I had literally just vomited all over the floor and rolled in it, where it's like, this is as raw as it gets. And she's like, okay, that'll do. Okay, good. That was super fun. But that's what it feels like. And you're like, but it's just a character. But it isn't. You have to feel it with them. You have to like put yourself in the shoes of the, he was telling me about a story he's writing. Can I tell a little bit about this? Okay. And it's a post-apocalyptic and they don't have electronics anymore. And so, you know the age of a character by what 80s or 90s, cassette tapes they're listening to, right, because that's what they have.
Yeah, left. So they have like CDs and cassette tapes. And then like my main characters are like a duo and they're kind of like late teens and they listen to like 90s rap because that's kind of more speaks to them. And it's like newer in a sense where it's not new, but it's closer. Whereas their mentor listens to more like 80s and kind of like 70s, even rock and stuff like that. And then you can see like a crossover kind of a little bit where like it's like the mentor influences them and what they listen to, and then the main characters influence the mentor a little bit, and like you can kind of see how their relationship is a little bit.
So we can start to see here the buds of characterization coming out. So it's fun for me, and then you start to think, okay, what bad things are going to happen to them? And not only are there songs that describe that thematically go with it, but what bad things are going to happen to them, and how vividly can I explore how they feel and what the world looks like to them.
And then like, how are they going to deal with that? How's that going to affect them going forward?
Right. Who do they become because of it?
Right. And like, I have, like in that story of before, it's like, mainly like the main characters, they like lose everything. Like
Yeah.
they're by themselves. They lose their family, they lose their friends or whatever, because everybody's gone, and it's like, how does that affect them?
Yeah.
And that's what drives them forward for a lot of it.
Do you find that when you try to imagine it, do you feel the feelings as you're writing? Do you feel sad? And do you act cranky if your characters are fighting? My husband's always like, who fought in your books today? You're impossible.
A lot of those times when I'm trying to like think of a scene, and I'm like thinking of it, it's like this like really emotional scene. I'll be like actually feeling it. And it's like, or like really like anger, and I'll like get into it, or
if somebody walked in right now, I would snap their head off because I am this character and we are really mad. And and then you let yourself completely feel it so that you can really viscerally I think you were talking about this with Hemingway, that he could get really visceral, that you can really viscerally describe it, crying until snot comes out of your nose as opposed to crying, right? And things like that. So anyway,
Hemingway said, write plain and hard about what hurts.
Exactly.
I feel like Hemingway has a lot of, sometimes when I read something, it's like you can tell when an author is like just trying to like make a emotional scene seem like vivid, where it doesn't feel like they've been actually feeling it. They're just like, oh, she was so depressingly sad or whatever. And then like Hemingway has this way of like, he's very blunt about it.
And he shows it.
Feel that he's feeling that, or the characters
he shows it. He doesn't tell it. He shows it.
Right.
He was a groundbreaker, I guess, from what I've read about it. And he was a newspaper reporter, so he wrote in short, plain sentences.
Economic, really. Word economy.
It got to the point very quickly, and
very
it's
economic.
not a lot of like big, like very extravagant words describing things. It's very blunt, very.
You juxtapose him like to a John Irving, right? Or someone, and you're like, we could learn a little something from Hemingway here, right? I mean, still some beautiful writing, but Hemingway showed that. Yes.
Yes. I mean, they're opposites. They're on the opposite pole.
Total. And you see that you have to be able to show the story to the reader. You have to be able to get them to feel the feelings of the characters and be in those moments. You don't have to use big words.
Right.
You don't have to use a lot of words. You use the right amount of words.
Yeah. I feel like there's like a line.
He also was against what I guess I would call overwriting, which he had something called, he described it as the iceberg theory, which is that he was writing to show the reader the iceberg that's above water. And he's assuming that the reader will know that there is stuff below the surface, but he doesn't have to tell them. If he writes well about the top, the reader will know what's below the surface. And so that's part of why it could be economic. He's assuming some intelligence on the part of the reader. It's kind of a partnership that he assumes the reader comes to the book with a certain amount of knowledge, and he doesn't have to overwrite the whole situation. So you're getting, that's some of what you were talking about,
right?
Is that approach that he takes.
Yeah, I feel like there's like a line there, definitely, that's like, you can still use the extravagant words to like describe things, and like these like long metaphorical, like figurative language and things like that. And then there's other times where it's just like, there's no need to, that like after a certain point, it kind of bores the reader. And also it's just can be hard to understand.
Yeah.
Where it's easier to just like a blunt, like you just describe it and you just do it basically. That's the best way I feel like I can.
Like it dilutes the impact,
right?
And so when you think about, if you just were a robot and you just looked at what Hemingway wrote with short sentences and short words and not a lot of narrative complexity in places, you'd say that is written at a whatever level, age grade or whatever.
Right.
But you're taking away the genius of all that ability to convey feeling with word economy, and what Ken's talking about, that ability to assume so much intelligence into the reader that it drives up what you're expecting and needing to bring to the table in order to get what it is he's delivering. So it's fantastic. I think that he's absolutely wonderful. Now, have you read Faulkner? We were talking about Naked Faulkner. There's not a lot of that in his books, but it's very dark. I think it's a very dark Southern kind of Gothic. Have you read Steinbeck, like Of Mice and Men?
Oh, yes, I have. Yeah.
And I think that's another one that's kind of a
Something's happened here. Hello.
spot here, and we wait. There we go. Do you read anybody in particular in like the fantasy genre or
fantasy genre? I like a lot of Rick Riordan. I've read like all the Percy Jackson books. I really like, especially how he incorporates his characters are very relatable. Like, and I like how he does that. Is that they're normal people, even though they're like demigods and these super like powered people and whatever. And it's very interesting to see like how relatable he makes them, because they go through everyday struggles.
Readers, Percy Jackson, awesome. But did you know that Rick Riordan was a successful adult mystery writer before he ever tackled middle grade fiction? Had to throw that out there. Long series featuring a great character in San Antonio, which of course is where the Percy Jackson books originated as well. But anyway, had to throw that in. In our readers group this week, we were trying to give author recommendations to, I'm going to say your name wrong, Frank, but one of the group members, Frank Lamone, and I left this guy off the list. Rick Riordan writes really good mysteries. He doesn't do it anymore because Percy Jackson became so incredibly successful, but he wrote mysteries for adults. So yeah, I love Rick Riordan. Yeah.
I feel like that also kind of shows like as a writer you can be very varied, and like he did the mysteries before that, and then he does like fantasy young adult fiction and things, and it's just
it was a beautiful transition. Storytellers tell stories, writers write. And this may be a good place to leave it as we encourage Ian to go off into his world, his life as a writer, is that writers write. Doesn't matter what they write. They just keep writing. Doesn't matter if it sucks. They keep writing until someday it sucks less. And someday they figure out what it is they want to write this time, or they're like Ken and they write romance and they write essayist type of narrative nonfiction and they write mysteries, etc. They just write.
Just write what's in your heart.
Exactly.
Whatever it may be. I'll give you one suggestion too for your reading list. I would read Stephen King's book on writing.
Oh, I love that book.
It's an incredibly helpful book and fun read.
Yeah, I mean, what's not to love about a horror writer with a sense of humor who is dispensing advice, sometimes with the subtlety of a machine gunner, but other times with this just wit. And he tells all these stories about his life and his writing and how he became the success he is. It's kind of if there's two books on writing, the craft of writing, as an encouragement that I really turn to, one is Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, but even more, it's Stephen King on writing. And I would read that over and over just for the pleasure of it and the validation of what it means to be a writer. Because Stephen King is not a snob. Stephen King is just every man out there horrifying the world.
He tried to make a living. He tried to teach and wrote at night, and everything he wrote was rejected. I think it was Carrie was the first book that was accepted.
And his wife pulled it out of the trash and said,
he had torn it up and thrown it in the trash.
Yeah. She said, Stephen, whoa. I think this may be the one. Have you ever heard of Carrie or seen the movie? Yeah. I was telling him earlier that Stephen,
she says, I think you've got something good here. You should work on this some more. And so he does. And he sends it off to his agent, who hasn't been able to sell anything for him except to an article to Field and Stream here and there and stuff like that. And the agent calls him up. This is part of why I really like this book, because it tells you what it's like to finally make it. His agent calls him up and tells him, "Are you sitting down?" He said, "I've sold your book. Are you sitting down?" He said, and he's standing in the hallway, and the guy says, "I've sold it for $350,000. Now, this is a guy who's just been barely, they were in poverty level living.
Yeah.
And he leans up against the wall. He slides down the wall into a sitting position. And his wife is away, and he's trying to think, after he hangs up, what's he going to do to get her a present for all she did to keep him going. And he runs off to the store, and he can't find anything, and nothing's working, and he ends up buying a vacuum cleaner and bringing it.
I just love that. I love that so much.
Yeah.
And and I was thinking, besides watching writers write is like watching paint dry. What would be for his shadow day most telling about what the life of a writer is like, and it would be that it is just really ordinary, and that there's so few of them that have that almost larger than life, with the television shows and the this and the that this conversation we're having, writers sitting around talking about writing. This is what writers do. So you have just experienced the life of a writer. It's also a form of procrastination.
Yeah, that's
let's talk about writing instead of doing it. Ken, you're awesome. And I've got a confession. The very beginning, when I hit record, it didn't, but I caught it within about 30 seconds. So I'm going to go back and fake an opening.
Okay. We're going to have to, okay. My dog is getting picked up to go walk here. So.
Oh, she's excited. Yeah. Or he.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for doing the show, and don't be a stranger.
All right. Well, nice meeting you, Ian.
No, it's
and
nice
good luck with your writing. I taught high school. You're as a sophomore, you're way up there.
He really is.
Roll. Yeah, I think you should keep it up. And it's great to see you again, Pamela. I wish we could do this more often.
Absolutely, anytime.
Okay.
I've got all the equipment, so we can have fancy conversations.
Okay.
You guys go check out the closing if you're just starting the series on Whippoorwill Hollow, and if not just starting, you can pull it up on Amazon and see all the books in the series, and I promise you're going to enjoy it. As far as Ian here, he's only probably got about another hour with me, and I'm trying to think of what I can do to torture him. I mean, teach him about writing. So I'll see you guys on another episode, and everyone out there, take care and read a good book. Bye. Thanks for joining us today on Crime and Wine, chats with crime fiction authors and Pamela Fagan Hutchins. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll check back in with us next time for more thrills, suspense, and stories that will mystify, sometimes horrify, and always leave you wanting more.